The first time he laughed, it wasn't even about the money. It was about the sound my keys made when they hit the concrete. They slipped from my hand and skittered under the mailboxes like beetles, and Mr. Dalton, my landlord, tilted his head back and let out this dry, barking laugh that bounced off the stairwell. "Careful, sweetheart," he said, loud enough for the whole lobby. "Wouldn't want to lose the only thing you've still got. You ever feel your face burn so hot you can taste metal?" I crouched, scraping my knuckles raw while the keys hid just out of reach. People came and went like I was part of the scenery. Laundry baskets, grocery bags, a stroller wheel squeaking. When I finally fished the keys free, my phone buzzed with the notification I'd been pretending wouldn't come. Rent past due, 3 days notice delivered. "Second month in a row," Dalton said, smiling out of one side of his mouth. He's one of those men who always looks like he's chewing on a secret. "I'll be sticking the paper to your door." Professional courtesy. I could smell the lobby, damp concrete, lemon cleanser, the ghost of someone's overcooked onions drifting from the stairwell. I could also smell myself, the tang of nerves, the cheap vanilla lotion I used because I couldn't afford the good stuff anymore. "I told you," I said quietly. "My temp assignment pays Friday. I'll be square." "That what you told me last time?" He tapped his temple. "I've got a memory. Don't make me the bad guy here." I wish I could tell you that in that moment I said something fierce and cinematic. I wish I told him to keep his paper and his laugh. But I didn't. Because when you're drowning, hero lines don't come. What comes is air. What comes is the math of survival. I nodded and slid past him, clutching my mail, that scarlet 3-day notice already burning through the envelope. "My name is Maya Ellis. I'm 28 years old, and for most of my life I've been the girl who held everything together with tape and smiley face lists. I do voices when I read to my niece, I say yes to extra shifts, and I keep the peace at Thanksgivings even when my brother brings his opinions like fireworks. I used to think being good was a kind of armor. It isn't. It's a mirror, one people like Dalton use to check their teeth." In my little studio on the 3rd floor, the radiator hissed like it was arguing with itself. I set my tote bag on the counter, peeled the notice open, and stared at the bold face type like it might rearrange if I willed it hard enough. Pay or quit. 3 days. Then court. Then the sheriff's tape across my door and my life in a storage unit I couldn't afford. I'm not here to make you pity me. I'm here because something happened that turned my quiet, careful life into a story worth telling. And if you're listening, it's probably because you already know what it feels like to be the butt of someone else's joke, to be the problem on someone's clipboard. I'm going to tell you how that turned, how a laugh became a receipt. I grew up in a beige rental with vertical blinds that clicked in the wind. My mom, Teresa, taught piano in our living room, and my dad, when he was around, worked odd construction jobs until his back went out and then didn't work at all. We weren't poor enough to qualify for sympathy, just poor enough to be invisible. I learned early that landlords don't listen to kids, that broken things stay broken until you fix them yourself. When my mom got sick, I dropped out of community college to help. Hospital air is this fake cold, like an apology that never lands. If you know, you know. After she passed, it felt like I forgot how to be a person who plans more than a week ahead. I took temp gigs, receptionist here, office runner there, living like the world might need me somewhere else tomorrow. Then the something stacked. A root canal, the mechanic shrug, my hours cut when the firm hired someone full-time with flexibility. That's the part you won't see on a spreadsheet. The way a woman can be responsible in all the boring ways and still end up being laughed at by a man who collects checks for a living. That night, I spread my bills on the laminate table and tried to make numbers behave. If I paid the minimum on the card and borrowed 20 from my friend Zoe, who would refuse and then insist on giving me 40, I could be within striking distance by Friday. Problem was food. Food and pride. Pride is expensive, it has hidden fees. I texted my older brother Evan even though I knew how it would go. Me, hey. Tiny favor? Short on rent this week. Can pay back next Friday. Evan, how short? Me, $220. Evan, again? Me, I know. Just this time. Evan, you gotta stop floating yourself with gig work. Get a real job. Me, I have one temp turned long-term. They're just transitioning. Evan, I'll send $100. That's it. And Maya? Move somewhere cheaper. Me, thanks. I appreciate it. Evan, don't make this a habit. He always said don't make this a habit, like I was choosing a vice. He's not cruel. He's married, has a baby, and thinks life is a series of correct choices. Eat the right breakfast, invest in the right fund, marry the right woman. I love him. I just don't tell him everything anymore. I slept badly, dreamed of keys falling through grates, woke to the radiator coughing as if it had lungs. On my way to the temp job, an architecture firm with white walls that scolded you for touching them, I passed the notice board in the lobby. A new sheet was taped to the glass, a little crooked. Trustee's sale of valuable real estate. I stopped. The building name, the address, the date and time. If you've never seen one, a trustee's sale notice looks bureaucratic, like something from a place with no faces. But to me it felt like a live wire in my hand. Foreclosure. The word glowed. This building, the one where I counted coins for laundry, where I learned the names of every dog on my floor while their owners remained strangers, was going to auction. Don't mind that, Dalton said, stepping into the lobby with a paper coffee cup. He wore a camel coat that made him look like a senator on his day off. Just a formality. Formality? The word came out before I could swallow it. Bank games. He sipped. We're negotiating. You pay your rent and let the grown-ups handle the rest. You're losing the building? I asked, heart beating a weird rhythm, hope and fear learning each other's steps. He smiled with all his teeth this time. You let me worry about my business, and I'll let you worry about your 3 days. Then, softer, almost kindly, world's hard enough without you sticking your nose where it'll get pinched. He left. The door thunked shut hard enough to tremble the glass. I traced the date on the notice, 3 weeks from Friday, 10 a.m., county courthouse steps, and felt the floor tilt just a little, not in a bad way, more like when an elevator starts moving and your stomach lifts. The firm, I answered phones and scheduled site visits and pretended I wasn't looking up foreclosure law on my lunch break. I learned how trustees' sales worked, cash or cashier's check, no inspections, buyer beware. I learned how sometimes when landlords ran their properties like piggy banks, the lenders got impatient. And I learned something else, the part that slid into my brain like a key into a lock. Sometimes the opening bid is less than the building's value. Sometimes much less. Yes, but you don't have what? Zoe said that night over ramen at the cheap place where the broth comes out too hot to taste. 200,000 lying around? I have a credit union account, I said, twirling noodles with a chopstick while she stared. I have decent credit. I have, don't laugh, an old 401k from my mom's job that I never cashed out. Zoe didn't laugh. She leaned in. Are you thinking what I think you're thinking? I'm thinking he laughed at me like I was a punchline, I said. And I'm thinking this building isn't just brick. It's leverage. If, I paused, because the word if can make you look foolish if you don't respect it. If the numbers align. If the bank's hungry. If I can get anyone to take me seriously. Zoe drummed the table. I take you seriously. You're the most boringly reliable person I know. Thank you. That was a compliment. She grinned. But seriously, Maya, auctions are shark water. I know. You don't swim with sharks. I can learn. She sighed and slurped and then said what real friends say when your dream looks half like a delusion. Okay. So we do this like grown-ups. We meet a housing counselor. We talk to a loan officer who won't mansplain. We figure out if there's a way to get proof of funds that doesn't involve selling your marrow. I'm not trying to buy a skyscraper, I said. Just a 4-story headache with a roof that leaks. And a landlord who laughs. And that. We made a list because lists make fear measurable. Step 1. Call the number at the bottom of the notice and confirm the sale wasn't a bluff. Step 2. Meet with a nonprofit that helps first-time buyers. Did they have a category for insane-time buyers? Step 3. Talk to a credit union about bridge financing. Step 4. Learn everything we could in 3 weeks without falling into a hole we couldn't climb out of. When I got home, the hallway smelled like someone's takeout and fresh paint. There was a smear of white along the baseboard where a brush had slipped. On my door, the notice waved like a flag in a wind that wasn't there. Pay or quit. I took it down, folded it once, then again, then slid it into a drawer with my childhood report cards, my mother's last grocery list, the kind of paper you keep because it proves you were trying. The next morning, I wore my best blouse, the one with the soft blue that made my skin look less tired, and walked into the credit union with my shoulders back, like a woman who buys buildings for breakfast. The loan officer, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a wedding ring that had been resized more than once, listened without interrupting. When I finished, she steepled her fingers. "You're not crazy," she said. "But you are very brave." "I prefer organized," I said. She smiled. "Let's see how organized we can make this." We mapped out a scenario that didn't depend on miracles: pre-approval for a commercial loan contingent on winning the auction, a secured line of credit backed by my 401k, a small pool of emergency funds that Zoe insisted on calling the don't get evicted kitty. It wasn't pretty, but it was a path. On my way out, I passed a corkboard with business cards stabbed into it like butterflies. One caught my eye: Ruben Castor, real estate attorney. First consult free. I took it because success is often a pocket of small, practical things you grabbed on your way out the door. That evening, as the sun slid behind the brick buildings across the street and my studio turned the color of old honey, I heard a knock. 2 short raps, confident. I opened the door to find Dalton holding a clipboard and a roll of blue tape. "We're repainting the stairwells," he said. "Assessments are going up. Also, just checking whether I can expect your rent by Friday." "Yes," I said. "You can." He looked past me into my apartment like he owned the air I breathed. Maybe he did. For now. "Good girl," he said, and something about those 2 words made a slow, clean anger light up inside me like a fuse. "You know," he added almost pleasantly, "it's not personal. It's math. Everything's personal to the person it happens to," I said before I could stop myself. He tilted his head. "You'll learn." 3 left, I stood in the doorway for a long time, listening to the faint sound of a TV from downstairs, the radiator sighing, someone laughing at something that wasn't about me. I took the auction notice out of my bag, smoothed it on the table, and circled the date with a red pen. Then I wrote 3 words under it, each one a promise I could keep. Show up. Ready. Here's the part where I tell you I didn't sleep, because sometimes the body knows when you've decided to be the kind of person who moves the plot. I lay awake watching the city blink and listening to my own breath. You're still with me, right? Because if you've ever been laughed at when you were already tired, I think you'll like what happens next. 3 days later, I handed Dalton an envelope thick with cashier's checks. He counted slowly, performatively, as if teaching a child to add. When he finished, he gave me a receipt and tapped it against my knuckles like we were toasting. "See," he said. "Grown-ups work it out." I smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't show teeth. 3 weeks, I said lightly, as if I were talking about the weather. "Big day for you." He paused, eyes flicking. "You reading bulletin boards now?" "Helps me keep up." "It's a formality," he said again, but this time the word didn't fit as well in his mouth. I closed my door before he could see the way my hands were shaking. Not with fear this time. With velocity. 'Cause tucked inside my tote bag, right behind the receipt he'd signed without looking at me, was a letter from the trustee confirming the sale date, the opening bid, and the details for registered bidders. And right under that was a business card with a neat black ink signature. "See you before the sale, R. Castor." If you're wondering whether I really knew what I was getting into, no. But I knew the shape of it. I knew that sometimes the universe writes the same word on 2 different pieces of paper, the one you dread and the one you circle in red, and asks what you plan to do about it. And I knew this. The next time someone laughed, it wasn't going to be him. The opening bid number on that letter? It was so low it made my stomach drop, low enough to be feasible, low enough to be a trap, and low enough that if I could get there first with the right checks in the right order, I could turn the key in a door that never opened for girls like me. If you want to understand why his laugh landed like a bruise, come with me back to the beige rental with the vertical blinds that clicked in every wind. Trail doesn't show up in a tuxedo. Grows in teaspoons, tiny unfairnesses doled out like medicine you never agreed to take. My mother, Teresa, taught scales to neighborhood kids on a spinet that always needed tuning. The living room smelled like lemon oil and pencil shavings from the way students pressed too hard on their practice logs. In the winter, she warmed their hands with a space heater and said, "Relax your shoulders. Music isn't a fight." I learned early that tenderness is work. It's also a bill someone pays. My father was better in stories than in rooms. When he was home, he dragged his bad back from one odd job to another and pretended pain was a personality. He loved us, I believe that, but he loved escapes too. Late-night TV humming blue across his face, scratch-off tickets lined up like a hopeful rosary on the coffee table. If you grow up with someone who's always almost winning, you learn to make do with almost. Evan was the golden proof that our family could look normal in photographs. 3 years older, he had the kind of smile that made adults nominate him for things. If we were a 2-lane road, he got the lane with the passing privileges, and I learned how to merge without being a nuisance. It wasn't evil. Don't paint my parents as villains. It was subtler. The way extra dollars appeared for Evan's soccer camp but vanished when I asked about the choir trip. The way my A's were, of course, you always were responsible, but his B+ came with a celebratory pizza because he's really turning it around. Do you know that feeling? Being praised like a piece of furniture, useful, reliable, unremarkable. Responsible girls, my mother used to say, don't need extras. The thing about extras is they aren't extra at all, they're oxygen. The first time a landlord taught me about power, I was 9. Our heat cut out in January, and the windows wore feathered ferns of frost like lace. Mom called Mr. Keene every day for a week while our breath ghosted in the kitchen. On day 8, he finally showed up in a brown coat that smelled like old cigarettes. He walked around like the apartment offended him personally. "Portable heater," he said, dropping a dented box like a favor. "Call if it stops working." My mother, who measured her words like a musician counts rests, said, "The lease says heat, Mr. Keene." Not the idea of heat. He blinked, taken aback by a piano teacher being inconveniently specific. "You people are always making things complicated," he said. He meant poor. He meant women without a man behind them. I didn't have the language yet, but I recognized the tilt of his voice, how it made us small so he could stay comfortable. That night I slept in 2 sweaters, listening to the heater tick. I remember thinking one day I'll be the person who fixes things. That thought should have felt brave. Felt exhausting. At school, I learned another survival skill, excellence as camouflage. Show up early, sit where they can see you, do the extra credit like it's a hobby. Teachers love a girl who makes their job easier. You don't get detention that way. You also don't get noticed until you're needed. I became fluent in "no, it's okay, and don't worry about it." People mistake that fluency for generosity. It's actually discipline, the kind you hone when asking for help costs too much. Evan and I were close in the way siblings who share a refrigerator and a complicated love can be. He taught me how to ride a bike and crash land without crying. I edited his essays. He taught me how to hold my breath underwater with the neighborhood kids and not panic. But by high school, our lanes diverged. He was varsity by sophomore year. I was student council secretary because the president always needs someone who remembers the keys. He got a used Civic with a bow on it when he turned 16. "He'll need to get to practice," Dad said. I got a bus pass and a reminder not to get home late because your mother has evening students. On the night of my senior awards, the living room filled with flowers from my mom's pupils. Their moms hugged me and said things like, "First in your family and what a bright future." Dad was late. When he finally arrived, breathless, jacket crooked, he tossed his keys on the table and said, "Evan made the all-county team." Everyone cheered, and my moment turned into a side note. I clapped too. Clap loud enough and you can convince yourself it doesn't sting. Why am I telling you this when the story is about a landlord and an auction? Because the kind of girl I became, the one who knows how to make a receipt out of someone's laugh, was built in those rooms. The girl who read the fine print on the heat clause became the woman who read the fine print on foreclosure notices. The girl who saved bus transfers in a neat stack is the woman who saves emails in labeled folders in case. Survival isn't an accident, it's a stack of small habits you carry like tools. After high school, I stayed local community college plus 2 jobs because tuition doesn't care about your bus pass. I wanted to study architecture. I liked the way space tells the truth about how people live, the way a room can make your shoulders lift or drop. But then Mom's cough became a diagnosis, and I learned a new vocabulary that tasted like metal: staging, margins, experimental, palliative. I left school to handle appointments, bills, the soft-spoken men with clipboards who said, "We'll submit prior auth again." When she died, the apartment felt wrong, like the furniture had moved half an inch and would never be right again. We moved. The rent went up. Grief costs too. Evan married Clara, a nurse with kind eyes and a family that wore matching sweaters for Christmas pictures. He wanted me to move on faster than grief knows how. "You love kids," he said. "Get certified as a teacher." He meant it kindly. I heard, "Be more like me. Make choices I recognize so I can keep loving you easily." I tried. I really did. But the world kept rewarding me for being flexible while asking me to be permanent. Temp jobs piled up like paper cups. The one constant was my ability to show up and smile when my stomach was a fist. When I found the studio on Maple Drive, the building with the chipping paint that would later wear the foreclosure notice like a bulletin board pin, I thought I'd landed someplace tolerable. It had a window that pretended to be big and a closet that wasn't, and the rent was almost fair. I met Mr. Dalton during a heat wave. He wore a white shirt and a satisfied squint and said, "No drama." I said, "No problem." He laughed, but softer then, like we were in on a joke together. If you listen to a laugh long enough, you'll learn who it's for. My mother left me 3 things: her sheet music with notes in the margins, a 401k she never touched because she planned to live longer, and a habit of keeping the good Tupperware hidden from guests because some people don't return what they borrow. "Be generous with your time," she used to say. "Not your boundaries." I failed at that last part often. It's harder to defend your lines when your rent is due and the word nice feels like currency. You're wondering about Evan now, aren't you? If the favoritism ever cracked, if he ever looked over and saw I was carrying a heavier end of the couch. He did. In flashes. When Mom got sicker, he started coming by more, bringing ground coffee and potted plants and cheerful blues. He wanted to help. He also wanted me to do the coordination, the quiet management that makes a family's crisis look like competence. After Mom died, his grief turned into advice. Budget better. Find a roommate. Move somewhere cheaper. Advice feels like help until you're drowning, then it feels like someone shouting from the shore about your technique. I don't want to paint him like Dalton, those are different species of man. But the sound of their certainty? It rhymes. The small betrayals that set this stage didn't have names. They were the way Dalton would forget to send the repair guy until Zoe threatened to post pictures on the tenant forum. The way he'd lose people's rent checks until they brought receipts. The way he'd call me sweetheart while he tacked a notice to my door with blue tape so careful it looked like a gift. And then the bigger betrayals, the ones that ate. The temp agency cutting my hours because the client is leaning towards someone permanent, as if I wasn't, as if my rent doesn't accept good intentions. The mechanic's call that sounded like, "We found 3 more things wrong, sorry." The friend who borrowed my portable AC for a weekend and gave it back a month later with a rattle that made the room shake. If you're keeping score, it's not about the AC. It's about being the person people assume will absorb the extra. When Dalton laughed in the lobby, it echoed years of people assuming I could absorb just one more thing. So when the trustee's sale notice fluttered on the bulletin board like a secret I wasn't supposed to read, I recognized the script. Here was a system that assumed I'd stand outside the room while men in suits wrote numbers on clipboards. Here was a door you're meant to believe isn't yours to touch. I touched it. The housing counselor at the nonprofit, a woman named Janelle with locks down her back and a voice like velvet, didn't flinch when I told her my plan. She underlined dates, circled phrases, and looked me in the eye the way only women who have eaten their share of teaspoons do. Foreclosure auctions can be dirty, she said. Shills, side deals, last-minute postponements. But they can also be opportunities. Don't romanticize it. Prepare. Zoe squeezed my arm under the table. We're preparing, she said. We are extremely unromantic. Janelle smiled and slid a stapled packet toward me. Homework. Read this. And don't go alone. Take someone who loves you but can count. I told Evan about the plan because you're supposed to tell your brother big things. He stared like I told him I planned to buy the moon. An auction? Maya, you don't even like bidding on eBay. You're setting yourself up. For what? I said too quick. For disappointment, he said, the way you say rain when you smell it. Maybe, I said. Or something else. He rubbed his forehead. What if you lose your deposit? What if you buy a roof that falls on your head? What if I win? I said, and the room went quiet in that charged way when a new idea walks in and everyone pretends not to see it. We didn't fight. We pressed our truths together like misfit puzzle pieces and agreed to not force them. He hugged me like he was holding a careful package. I just want you safe, he said. Safe in his dictionary meant steady job, roommate, lease signed by a landlord who answers the phone. Safe in mine was muscle I hadn't grown yet. The days ticked down. I learned the rhythm of the courthouse steps in my head. The auctioneer's cadence, the way bids jump, the way people pretend they're bored so you can't read their numbers. I practiced in front of my bathroom mirror saying, "Bidder number 103," without my voice shaking. I ironed my blouse because courage looks better when it's pressed. Two things happened the week before the sale that told me the ground was moving. First, Ruben Castor, the real estate attorney with the business card I'd pocketed, met me for coffee at a spot where conversations stick to the wood. He wore a navy suit and sneakers, the uniform of men who've chosen comfort without giving up the silhouette. He flipped through the trustee's packet like a magician palming cards. "Opening bids low," he said, and gave me a look I still can't fully read. Sometimes that's bait. Sometimes it's a bank that wants out before the building becomes a lawsuit. "What would you do," I asked, "if you were me?" He smiled without showing his teeth. I never pretend to be a 28-year-old woman who's decided to step into a circle where men don't make room. What I would do? I'd bring enough to make one more bid than my stomach thinks I can. And I'd bring someone whose job is to pull me by the elbow if my pride starts spending my rent. "Zoe," I said. "That's Zoe." "Good," he said. Listen to Zoe. Second, I came home to find Dalton on the phone in the stairwell, his voice pitched low and harsh. I don't snoop. Okay, I snoop when the universe puts a conversation 3 feet from my door, but I didn't need to try. The stairwell carries sound like a church. "Don't care what the bank wants," he was saying. "She's 3 days late every other month. I can make that look like chronic. I'll have her out before they change hands." He listened, jaw tight. "Then we stall the sale. Or we make it messy. That building is mine." He laughed then, a different laugh, hard, cornered. The laugh of a man who believes paperwork will always get up and take his side. Something cold slid down my spine, not fear exactly, for shadow wearing a recognizable coat. I stepped quietly back into my apartment and closed the door as softly as a secret. "If you're still with me, you can feel it too, can't you?" The way some men mistake tenants for furniture. The way some stories think they know their ending until a girl who's memorized the fine print shows up with her own pen. Mini foreshadow. The morning of the auction, there would be more than bidders on those courthouse steps. There would be a man who isn't supposed to bid at all, and a rumor about a postponement that would test whether I'd learned to hold my line, or whether Dalton's laugh would write the last line for me. The first rule of survival is this: when people think you're weak, they show you their whole playbook. Dalton thought I was weak. He started small. The laundry machine suddenly malfunctioned the week before the auction, swallowing quarters without spinning. When I called the number on the service sticker, they told me the landlord had cancelled maintenance. Tenants complained in the lobby, lugging baskets to laundromats. Dalton just shrugged. "Save your receipts," he said. "Maybe I'll reimburse you." That maybe was deliberate, a test balloon to see how much irritation we tolerate. Then came the hallway lights. Out for 3 nights, shadows stretching long like something from a cheap horror film. "Electrical upgrade," Dalton said when I cornered him. "Nothing to worry about." Nothing to worry about. Easy to say when you don't walk home at midnight, keys between your knuckles. I started to recognize the pattern. He wasn't just careless. He was tightening a screw, nudging tenants toward late payments, stacking grievances he could later point to. "Chronic issues," he'd say to the bank, to the court, to anyone who asked. We weren't just tenants anymore. We were pawns. Zoe noticed first. "You see what he's doing, right?" she said over takeout containers at my place. "He wants people spooked. Scared tenants move out, and empty units make a foreclosure harder to sell. He's trying to freeze the board before you ever sit down." "I know," I said. "I'm keeping notes. Dates, times, every broken bulb." I flipped my journal open, the pages already thick with scribbles. "He thinks nobody's watching." Zoe smirked. "He doesn't know you've been watching your whole life." Till it wasn't just the building pressure. It was personal. Every time I passed him in the stairwell, his eyes flicked toward me like a coin he hadn't pocketed yet. He started calling me Sunshine, which would have been harmless if not for the sneer tucked into it. "Rent on time, Sunshine?" he'd ask, even if I'd just handed him a receipt. It was bait, and I wanted so badly not to bite. Meanwhile, I worked the temp job like a soldier on double shifts. The architecture firm was drafting blueprints for a new high-rise downtown, and I answered phones while listening to words like zoning variance and structural load echo around conference rooms. Every blueprint on the wall was a reminder: people decide what stands and what falls. My cubicle became a quiet classroom. I learned without asking. Because knowledge is a weapon that doesn't weigh anything. The escalation wasn't only from Dalton. My brother Evan decided this was the month to stage his intervention. He invited me to dinner, just family, which meant Clara made pasta and the baby smacked peas onto the high-chair tray while Evan built his case. "You can't keep living like this, Maya," he said. "Temp work, eviction notices, fantasies about auctions." "Not fantasies," I cut in. "Plans." He held up his hands like I was the loud one. "Fine. Plans. But they don't look like plans from here. They look like you gambling your future because you can't admit you need stability." Clara, ever the peacemaker, slid a basket of breadsticks between us. "Maybe it's not either/or," she said gently. "Maybe stability can look different for Maya." Evan sighed. "Stability looks like a paycheck every 2 weeks and a landlord who doesn't know your name." "Stability looks like power," I said. "And I'm done being the girl who begs for it." The baby banged the tray like a gavel. Case closed. But Evan's words stuck, echoing as I lay awake that night. Was I gambling? Was I throwing my scraps of savings into shark water because I hated one man's laugh? Fear is tricky like that, it disguises itself as reason. I kept circling back to Zoe's words. He doesn't know you've been watching your whole life. Watching meant I understood when pressure was strategy, not accident. Watching meant I knew when to move. 2 days later, I found the hallway bulletin board covered with fresh notices. Dalton had taped them crooked, the blue tape like ugly bows. Mandatory inspections. Possible lease violations. The language was vague enough to scare anyone. People gathered in the lobby, murmuring. Mrs. Alvarez from 2B asked me if she'd be fined for her window AC unit. College kids from 4C whispered about breaking their lease early. Fear spreads fast in closed spaces. Dalton came down the stairs with a smirk. Just keeping things up to code, he said. Nothing to worry about if you've got nothing to hide. That's when I realized he wasn't just protecting his property. He was protecting his pride. If the building slipped out of his hands, he wanted it to look like our fault. Like tenants who couldn't manage their lives. Like me, the girl with overdue rent notices taped to her door. I started photocopying everything. Notices, receipts, even his offhand notes written in Sharpie. My drawer became a paper shield. Zoe called it the ammo box. Every villain leaves fingerprints, she said. You just have to dust for them. The night before the auction, I dreamed of my mother's piano. Keys were chipped, yellowed, but in the dream they glowed white like new ivory. I pressed them, and the sound wasn't music but a gavel's crack. Wake up, it said. Decide. I woke before dawn, heart thundering. On my fridge, the auction date was circled in red. 10 a.m. courthouse steps. I packed my tote, cashier's checks, ID, pre-approval letter, notebook, Zoe's hand squeezed over mine for courage. I wore the same blue blouse, pressed again because sometimes fabric is armor. As I locked my door, I saw Dalton in the stairwell, phone to his ear, pacing. His voice carried, even though he tried to lower it. Spread the word, he was saying. Sales postponed. Bank wants another 30 days. Waste of time to show up. My hand froze on the railing. Postponed? My stomach dropped, then twisted. It smelled like a bluff, but what if it wasn't? If I didn't show, I'd never know. If I did, I might stand alone on courthouse steps like a fool. I glanced down at him. He looked up, caught my eye, and smiled. Not the kind of smile you share. Kind a man gives when he thinks the game is already over. That's how escalation works. They don't just tighten screws, they try to bend your mind, make you doubt your footing. That's how they win before the bidding even starts. But I'd spent my whole life learning to read between the lines. And this time I wasn't going to flinch. As I stepped onto the bus that morning, clutching my tote like it was the last warm thing I owned, I whispered a promise under my breath. See you on the courthouse steps, Dalton. They say a person's breaking point is like glass. It doesn't crack slowly. It shatters in one clean sound you never forget. Mine shattered on the courthouse steps. The sky was the pale gray of unfinished business, clouds hanging low like they wanted to watch. County courthouse rose ahead of us, all sandstone columns and chipped paint, as if justice itself had been through too many winters. I clutched my tote so tightly my fingers ached, Zoe walking beside me with that springy determination only she could carry. Remember, she whispered, don't chase. If it goes past your line, let it go. I nodded, though my chest buzzed with the opposite. Let nothing go. Not today. The steps were crowded with men in suits, clipboards tucked under their arms, voices low and confident. They didn't even look at me. I was invisible in my pressed blouse and scuffed flats. Invisible until Dalton appeared. He wore a tailored gray suit that didn't match his smirk. He caught my eye across the steps and raised his coffee cup like a toast. The arrogance of it, the assumption that I was just a tenant come to watch my own defeat, snapped something inside me. The auctioneer, a brisk man with a voice like gravel, called the sale to order. He read the legal description of the building as if reciting a bedtime story he'd told too often. Then he named the opening bid. It was low. Lower than even Reuben, the attorney, had warned me to expect. My heart thudded in my throat. This was possible. This was real. Do I have an opening bid? Dalton raised his hand first, lazy, like tossing away a coin. "Here," he said. The auctioneer nodded. "Bid acknowledged." "Do I have?" My voice came out steadier than my knees. "Here." Heads turned. The suits looked me up and down, dismissive, but the auctioneer wrote my bidder number without flinching. The game had begun. The bids rose in practiced increments. Dalton barely looked up, calling numbers as though he were ordering lunch. I matched each one, my voice firm, Zoe's hand a steady anchor at my elbow. Crowd shifted, eyes narrowing. Who was this girl in the blue blouse who refused to fold? At one point, Dalton smirked at me directly. "Careful, sunshine. Don't spend money you don't have." I swallowed the heat in my throat and said clearly, "Bid." The auctioneer slammed his gavel on the last call, but Dalton raised again, his jaw tight now. Not a lazy bid, an angry one. I saw it, the pride, the disbelief that I'd dared to step into his arena. This wasn't about property anymore. It was about humiliation. And then, my breaking point. The numbers climbed higher than my safe ceiling. Zoe's grip on my arm tightened. "Maya, stop. This is the line." But Dalton leaned in toward the auctioneer, lowering his voice. "We can postpone. Bank's on board. Waste of time." He wanted me to hear. He wanted me to choke on doubt. And in that moment, I realized it wasn't just money he was gambling with, it was my belief in myself. Every late rent, every notice taped to my door, every laugh in the lobby, it had all been one long rehearsal for this humiliation. Something inside me snapped clean through. I thought of my mother, fighting for heat in that January apartment. I thought of Evan's advice of being told to settle, to be safe, to stay small. And I thought of every time Dalton called me sunshine like it was a leash. I lifted my bidder card. "Bid." The auctioneer nodded, surprised. Dalton snarled. The number was mine. The gavel came down hard, the crack echoing through the courtyard. "Sold." Silence hit the crowd like a held breath. My stomach twisted. I had done it, but at what cost? My safe ceiling was gone. I had crossed the line. Pride and terror tangled in my chest. Dalton's face went pale, then blotchy red. He stepped toward me, close enough I could smell his cologne, sharp, chemical. "You think you've won," he hissed. "You don't even know what you bought. That building will bleed you dry." Zoe stepped between us, chin high. "Funny," she said. "Didn't look like bleeding. Looked like winning." We walked away with papers clutched in my shaking hand, my whole body buzzing like I'd swallowed lightning. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt like glass after it shatters, sharp, jagged, dangerous even to myself. That night, alone in my studio, I spread the documents on my table. The ink was real. My name, owner, was real. But so were the numbers, terrifying in their finality. Zoe's words echoed, "Don't chase." Had I chased? Or had I finally stopped running? I didn't sleep. Not because of fear this time, but because of what Dalton said last, the warning that sat heavy in my chest. You don't even know what you bought. And deep down, I knew he was right. The next morning, I opened the first envelope of building records, and saw the unpaid repair liens stacked high like a mountain I wasn't sure I could climb. Truth doesn't walk in with a spotlight. It arrives like a fire alarm, shrill, undeniable, and suddenly you're running toward the smoke with a bucket and a backbone. I spread the building records across my table the way nurses lay out instruments before a hard procedure. Top page was a ledger of liens, unpaid repair bills, fines, and a replacement reserve that looked like a throat someone had cut. Numbers bled down the page. Roof patch invoices, boiler servicing, elevator inspections I didn't remember anyone performing. "Okay," Zoe said, pulling her hair into a war bun. "Which of these survive foreclosure?" "Municipal liens," I said, circling them. "Some code fines. Water. Maybe a couple of mechanics liens if they attached early. And the rest?" "Noise," I said. "Or fraud." The word felt big in my mouth. But then I found it, the pattern you only see when you've been trained by life to color inside tiny squares. Vendor after vendor, MD Property Services, MD Mechanical, MD Janitorial. Dress is different, P.O. box is different, but the initials didn't move. MD. Dalton's first name is Mark. I Googled like a woman who has finally figured out where to aim. Public business filings aren't shy if you know the dance steps. Within an hour, I had printouts spread like playing cards. MD Property Services, LLC, manager listed as M. Dalton. MD Mechanical, registered agent Mark D. A third, newer company that shared a mailing address with Dalton's office suite. Zoe whistled. He was paying himself? Allegedly, I said, because now I had an attorney on speed dial and his voice lived in my head. But yes, called Ruben Castor. He picked up on the second ring like men do when they respect the clock. I told him what I was looking at. Self-dealing, he said. Classic. Not illegal if disclosed and market rate. Illegal if it wasn't. You have the contracts? I flipped pages. I have invoices. No bids. No competitive quotes. Good. Bad for him, Ruben said. Also, security deposits. Did he escrow? I stopped. This I hadn't checked. I pulled the tenant files the bank had dumped into a cardboard box like a confession. Deposits were logged, amounts, dates, but I couldn't find an escrow account statement. No interest calculations. No bank letters. Just a line on a ledger held operating. Zoe's eyebrows shot up. Operating is not escrow. No, I said. Operating is the checkbook he buys coffee with. Ruben exhaled the way you breathe out when a missing piece clicks in. In this state, that's a violation. Civil penalties. Treble damages sometimes. Keep digging. I'll draft a notice to preserve records. He'll try to cleanse. He meant erase. Delete. Launder his mess with new paper. I didn't sleep that night. Not from fear. From velocity. The next morning, Janelle, our velvet-voiced counselor, sat with us in the nonprofit's conference room and underlined the path forward. You've got 3 rails, code, civil, and story, she said, tapping each with her pen. Code gets you an inspector. Civil gets you leverage. Story gets you consent, tenants, press, a shift in public air pressure so he can't hide in the fog. Story, I repeated, because that was my mother's language. I can do story. We started with code. Janelle made a call that sounded like a favor from another lifetime. 2 days later, Inspector Lynn walked through the building with a clipboard and the eyes of a woman who remembered when all she could afford was a studio with a radiator that hissed at her. She photographed mold blooms behind laundry room drywall, a carbon monoxide detector dangling by a wire, the stairwell lights that malfunctioned for a week. She peeled back corner tiles in the basement and, there, she said, pointed at a soft spot that squelched under her boot. Water. Ingress. Neglected for years. Someone claimed these inspections were completed, she added, thumbing through a file. But I don't see permits for the work. MD Property Services, I said. Her eyebrow rose. Of course. We filed the report. Violations don't humiliate the way a courtroom does, but they have a steady drumbeat. You can't ignore a drum forever. Civil came next. Ruben sent a litigation hold notice to Dalton's email and fax. Men like Dalton still keep faxes. They like the sound of paper proving they were important. We demanded deposit records, repair bids, copies of leases, communication with the trustee. He CC'd the bank's special assets manager, who, it turns out, had been trying to get Dalton to answer questions for months. When I called the manager, Anita Singh, voice crisp as a stapler, she didn't quite congratulate me. But she didn't sound disappointed either. Frankly, she said, we're relieved someone local bought it. We got whistleblower chatter about something called postponement games on the courthouse steps. My stomach did a slow turn. He told people the sale was postponed. So we heard, she said. We've started a file. Story came easier than I expected. I printed flyers, tenant meeting Saturday 4 p.m. lobby. No drama, just information. Bring your questions. I didn't add bring your receipts, but people did. Mrs. Alvarez came with a folder full of pink carbon copies. College kids brought photos of mushrooms sprouting from their bathroom ceiling like a bad joke. Even the quiet man from 1A, the one who nodded but never spoke, unfolded a crumpled notice about a late fee from a month he'd paid on time. I stood on a milk crate Zoe stole from behind the bodega because making eye contact makes you braver. I'm Maya, I said. The new owner. The room inhaled. A baby squeaked. Then a scatter of claps, uncertain but real. I wish I could tell you this will be easy, I said. It won't. There are liens and repairs and a roof that's more band-aid than bone. But I can tell you this, your deposits will be put in escrow. Your repairs will be real. And I lifted the stack of invoices with MD stamped on everything like a dog marking corners. We're going to make sure the last guy doesn't get away with turning your lives into his side hustle. That's when a voice from the doorway cut through. Bold words for a girl who bought a money pit. Dalton. In a golf shirt this time, no suit, as if casual could undo the courthouse. He carried a clipboard he didn't need and swagger he thought counted as jurisdiction. You're trespassing, I said evenly. This is a tenants meeting. I'm the manager of record, he said, waving papers. Until transfers are complete. Reuben stepped forward from the back wall where he'd been leaning like a chess piece you hadn't noticed. Those transfers recorded at 10:07 a.m. this morning, he said, lifting a stamped copy of the trustee's deed. I'd be careful about claiming authority you no longer have. Dalton's eyes flicked to the stamp, real ink county seal. His jaw pulsed. Then he saw Inspector Lynn at the edge of the crowd, city badge clipped to her belt, and you could actually watch the air leave his posture. Mrs. Alvarez stood, hands shaking, and held up her folder. You charged me a window screen replacement 3 times, she said. But you never changed my screen. College kid from 4C chimed in. You put a note on our door that said inspection tomorrow, and then you walked in at 7 a.m. without knocking. A murmur rose, honest and loud, the sound of people realizing a thing together. That story. It isn't just a headline, it's a room learning its own voice. Dalton tried to grin. It flopped. You people never appreciate how much work. Zoe laughed, a bright, sharp thing that sliced the air. Work? Like paying MD Mechanical for a boiler you never installed? Eyes swung to me. I didn't look away. I held up the invoices with MD in triplicate like a magician revealing the trick. We found your companies, I said quietly. We found your checks. Something cracked, maybe pride, maybe the fantasy that no one would look under the tarp. He moved toward me like he meant to tower. Reuben shifted, a neat block. Inspector Lynn cleared her throat, a sound with authority. Dalton retreated a half step. Then he did the thing men like him do when truth crowds them. He lied bigger. Everything was disclosed, he said. Market rate. Emergency repairs. You can't prove otherwise. Maybe, I said. Or maybe Manny will. Heads turned. From the back of the lobby, a man in a faded work jacket stepped forward, baseball cap in his hands. Manny, the old super. He left last year with a limp and no severance. I hadn't seen him since, not until he called me that morning, voice low. He made me sign things. I want to make it right. Manny nodded at the crowd, then at me. He told me to zip tie smoke detectors instead of replacing them, he said, voice steady. Said he'd bill the replacement anyway. He made me sign blank timesheets. Paid me off the books for weekend work so he could write 'em up as professional emergency service. I kept copies. Reuben's pen clicked like a lock. You kept copies? Manny pulled an envelope from inside his jacket and handed it to me like a relic. Timesheets, photos, emails printed from a Gmail account that had Dalton's full name front and center. One email subject line, postponement talking points followed by bullet points about telling bidders the sale would be delayed. Another, use MD invoice template with a blank Word doc attached. Dalton's face drained the way a bad roof drains, slow, then all at once. "This is harassment," he snapped. "You can't." "We can," Ruben said. "And we will." The room hummed, a low, rising electricity that tasted like lemon cleanser and something new, courage. I glanced at Zoe. She grinned like a woman finding the trailhead she knew existed. One more call closed the loop. I stepped to the side, pressed speaker, and let the voice fill the lobby. "Anita Singh, bank manager." "Mr. Dalton," she said, "we've reviewed the records forwarded by Ms. Ellis's counsel. Your draw requests against the repair reserve appear unsupported. Please be advised the bank will be referring this matter for further review." He looked around as if the walls might save him. They didn't. Walls tell the truth, I've always believed that. The truth now was a simple geometry. His lines were collapsing. He backed toward the door, blustering. "You think you won because you bought a dying building? You'll beg me for help in 6 months." "I won't," I said, and I finally let the anger in my throat crystallize into something useful. "But I'll take your deposition." He left. The door sucked shut on his retreat like the building itself was done with him. Silence held for a breath. Then the lobby broke into applause. Not the stadium kind, not victory yet, but relief clapping its hands because it needed to make a sound. I climbed down from the milk crate, knees shaking, and hugged Manny so carefully you'd think he was made of glass. "Thank you," I said. He ducked his head. "I'm sorry," he whispered back. "For what I did. For what I didn't. Make it right with me now," I said. "Stay. Help me fix what he broke. I'll pay you on the books. Real rates. Real work." He nodded, eyes bright. "Okay." By the time the tenants drifted back to their apartments, the lobby smelled like relief and coffee someone had brewed and forgot. Zoe flopped onto the milk crate like a throne. "We need a whiteboard," she said. "A list of repairs. Calendar. A deposit audit. Also snacks at meetings. People reveal more when their hands are busy." I laughed, shaky and real. "You're hired." I went upstairs and called Evan. When he answered, I didn't tangle my words into something safer. "You were right about one thing," I said. "I need stability. I'm building it, one receipt at a time." He was quiet a moment. Then, softly, I read the trustee deed. "You stalk the county recorder now?" "Maybe," he said. "Maybe I'm learning your language." A beat. "I'm proud of you." I looked out my window at the brick that had been a wall and now felt like a promise. "Come to the lobby tomorrow," I said. "You'll see it." "See what?" "Us," I said. "The building we are when we're not afraid." Mini cliffhanger. The next afternoon, I taped a simple flyer over the old foreclosure notice. Community meeting with press, Tuesday 6 p.m. 5:58, the lobby thrummed, tenants, Manny, Inspector Lynn, Ruben, a local housing reporter with a mic, and then the glass door swung open. Dalton walked in with a lawyer in a too-sharp suit, a man I recognized from courthouse steps. The reporter lifted her mic. Camera light snapped on. I took my place on the milk crate, trustee's deed in one hand and Manny's envelope in the other, and finally, opened my mouth. I didn't raise my voice. I raised documents. That's how you win against a man who thinks volume is proof. The lobby hummed under the fluorescence, tenants shoulder to shoulder, Zoe at my side, Manny clutching his envelope, Inspector Lynn with her clipboard, Ruben with a neat stack of stamped filings, and a local reporter balancing a mic and a camera light that turned the air into a stage. 6 p.m., the glass door swung open and in walked Dalton, wearing a confidence that didn't fit him anymore, trailed by a lawyer in a suit so sharp it looked rented from the word intimidate. I stepped onto the milk crate. My hands didn't shake. Thank you for coming, I said to the room, then looked squarely at the camera. My name is Maya Ellis. I'm the new owner of this building. Tonight is about facts. The reporter nodded. We're rolling. I held up the trustee's deed. Fact 1, ownership transferred at 10:07 a.m. yesterday. Mr. Dalton is no longer the landlord of record. Dalton's lawyer, tall, shiny tie, smiled with courtroom teeth. Congratulations on overpaying for a distressed asset, he said smoothly. We're here to correct some misunderstandings before your client defames my. Ruben's voice cut cleanly. Anticipatory threats don't work here. Anything we say is backed by documents. Also, it's a public concern regarding housing safety. Our jurisdiction has robust anti-slap protections. Proceed, Ms. Ellis. I laid the invoice grid on a folding table Zoe had stolen from the basement. We'd scotch-taped a timeline color-coded with 3 columns that made the pattern impossible to ignore. Vendor name. Date/work described. Payment amount. 3 initials repeated down the page like a watermark. MD. Fact 2, I said. 4 years this building paid MD Property Services, MD Mechanical, and MD Janitorial, companies registered to M. Dalton or his office address. We found no competitive bids, no disclosure to tenants, and charges that don't match actual work performed. Murmurs rolled through the lobby, recognition and anger pairing off like dancers. Camera light warmed my cheek. The lawyer flicked his wrist. Related party vendors are common. If the work was market rate. Market rate? I lifted a second sheet. 3 quotes I'd pulled that afternoon from independent contractors for the same boiler service MD Mechanical billed last winter. MD Mechanical charged $18,200 for a full replacement that never happened. 3 licensed companies quoted between $4,500 and $6,200 for the actual service the building received. I slid Manny's photos beside the quotes, boiler serial plate unchanged, a date-stamped image of the replaced unit still rusting in place. That's not market. That's markup. The lawyer's smile thinned. Allegations at best. Receipts, Zoe said brightly, and the room chuckled. I kept going. Fact 3, security deposits were held, operating instead of an illegally required escrow account. We have tenant ledgers showing deposits pooled with rent and expenses. That exposes Mr. Dalton to civil penalties and potential treble damages. Inspector Lynn stepped forward a careful inch, neutral but present. My office issued multiple code violations today, she said to the reporter, voice even. I cannot comment on penalties, but non-compliance carries escalating fines. Dalton barked a laugh that sounded like a cut. You think you can run a building with a bulletin board and a piano teacher's daughter? You don't even know what a reserve study is. I ignored the jab. Fact 4, I said, steady. Email. I held up a printed chain from Manny's envelope. The subject line glared under the light. Postponement talking points. Bullet points advised telling bidders the sale was being delayed. This email went out the morning of the auction from an account with Mr. Dalton's name. That's potential bid rigging, or at minimum interference. The reporter's eyebrows arched. We've heard rumors of that at other sales, she said. On record now. Dalton's tie man tried to step in again. Even if true, it's not a crime to be mistaken. It is, however, a crime to falsify inspection records, Ruben said, lifting a thin folder. We have signed timesheets and directives instructing substitutes for required replacements. We filed a litigation hold notice yesterday. Any destruction of records from this point is sanctionable. The room quieted so much I could hear someone's baby hiccup. Dalton's eyes ticked to the camera like it might swallow his words whole. Manny cleared his throat. He didn't climb the milk crate. He didn't need to. He held up a smoke detector with zip ties still hugging its spine. He told me to put this up and bill for a new one, he said. Said no one would check. The reporter's camera zoomed in. I watched realization chase across faces. Tenants who'd learned to minimize now letting themselves be angry. I shifted to the table's last item, a crisp letter on bank letterhead. Fact 5, I said. The lender's special assets manager, Ms. Anita Singh, has opened a review into Mr. Dalton's draws from the repair reserve. She's requested full documentation of all MD invoices. Right on cue, my phone buzzed. So is it? I tapped speaker. Anita's voice, precise, cool, filled the lobby. For the record, she said, our preliminary review shows unsubstantiated disbursements tied to entities controlled by Mr. Dalton. We will cooperate with any city inquiry and reserve the bank's rights to seek recovery. The baby hiccuped again. Someone whispered, "Oh." Dalton's mask cracked. "This is theater," he snapped at the reporter. "And you," he jabbed a finger at me, then realized how it would look on camera and only half jabbed. "You're borrowing trouble you can't pay back. In 6 months you'll be begging me to consult." "I won't," I said, and that wasn't bravado, it was a sentence that fit my lungs now. "But you will be answering subpoenas." His lawyer reached for his arm. "We're done here." "Almost," Reuben said, stepping forward, voice carrying without strain. He slid a stamped complaint from his folder and handed it to the lawyer. Filed at 4:13 p.m. today, Ellis et al. Versus Dalton et al. Causes of action include conversion of tenant deposits, fraud, unjust enrichment, breach of fiduciary duty as property manager, and unfair business practices. We also filed a temporary restraining order barring Mr. Dalton from representing himself as manager or entering restricted areas. Hearing set for Friday. "It won't stick," the lawyer said, but he paled half a shade. Press did what press does. Microphone up, voice neutral and sharp. "Mr. Dalton, did you use shell companies to bill your tenants for work not performed? Did you instruct staff to mislead bidders at a foreclosure sale? You can tell a lot about a man by his answer to a clean question." He didn't deny. He blustered. "You people don't understand operations," he said. "Tenants always want something for nothing. She," he pointed again, caught himself, lowered his hand, "she's a renter with delusions of grandeur." "That renter," Zoe said, "bought your building." The room laughed, not cruelly but with the relief of a knot sliding loose. The reporter angled her mic to me. "Ms. Ellis, what happens next?" I looked into the lens like it was one person on their couch, because that's how my mother taught me to tell a story, with a voice you'd use in a kitchen, not a courtroom. "We escrow deposits starting tomorrow," I said. "Every tenant gets a letter with account details. We've hired an independent contractor, Manny will supervise, to address safety issues first, detectors, stairwell lights, basement water. We'll post timelines and budgets in the lobby each week. Rent won't go up this year. Late fee policies will comply with city law, period. We will not be perfect, but we will be honest." Claws lifted, small at first, then threading together. Evan slipped in quietly near the back, work shirt, tired eyes. When he caught mine, he crossed his arms and smiled the way brothers do when they finally see you without their old filters on. The lawyer hissed in Dalton's ear. They turned to leave. At the door, the reporter called, "One last question. Did you place tenant deposits in a separate interest-bearing account as required?" Dalton spun, fury flickering. "No one does that," he snapped. Silence landed hard. Camera caught it. So did the tenants. And for once, so did he. He swallowed, realizing he'd said the one thing you never say out loud. "Thank you," the reporter said, somehow polite, and clicked off the mic as if closing a book. We didn't cheer then. We didn't need to. Justice doesn't always feel like a drumline. Sometimes it's the quiet click of a trap finally closing on the right ankle. Reuben guided me off the milk crate. My knees remembered how to be knees. Zoe hugged me so tight the air squeaked out of my ribs. Manny put the smoke detector on the table like a trophy you never wanted but needed to show. Outside, the evening smelled like wet concrete and takeout. The camera crew packed up, promising to cut a piece for the late broadcast. Tenants lingered, talking to one another the way people do in hallways after a fire drill, nervous, relieved, a little giddy. Inspector Lin gave me a copy of the violation list with a clipped, almost smile. "Start here," she said, tapping the top line. "You'll sleep better." Evan threaded through the crowd and stood in front of me. He didn't deliver advice. He handed me a roll of blue painter's tape. "For fixing, not for notices," he said. I laughed, an involuntary, surprised sound that felt like oxygen. "Stay," I said. "We're making a whiteboard." We worked. That night the lobby became a war room. Zoe drew columns on poster board. I wrote dates. Tenants added sticky notes where leaks lived and bulbs died. Manny penciled in a repair sequence that didn't waste steps. We opened a laptop and, with Ruben watching the numbers, created a separate escrow account and a repair account with read-only access for tenants to see balances and withdrawals monthly. Transparency isn't free, it costs your pride sometimes. But it buys trust. At 9:12 p.m. my phone pinged. A clip from the evening news, my blue blouse, the milk crate, the words postponement talking points over Dalton's shoulder. Then his quote, "No one does that." The anchor's eyebrows did the rest. The station's site posted a link. The comments did what comments do, but threaded among the messy takes were tenants from other buildings, other landlords saying, "Us too." At 9:27 p.m. Anita emailed. The bank would freeze the remaining repair reserve tied to Dalton's company's pending review. She copied a city agency I hadn't expected to see looped in. The subject line read, "Referral." 10:03 p.m. Ruben received notice. The judge granted the temporary restraining order. Effective immediately, Dalton was barred from common areas except as a private visitor, and prohibited from holding himself out as manager. Hearing confirmed for Friday. 10:40 p.m. Zoe and I walked the stairwells with a box of new LED bulbs. She handed me the tape. "Your turn," she said like it was an initiation. I climbed the last steps to the 4th floor, where the hallway had been a dark river for a week, and twisted the bulb into place. Light bloomed, clean and indifferent, touching every door with the same small mercy. Tenants opened peepholes, then doors. Someone clapped. Someone whistled. Someone cried. Light doesn't solve your life. It does make it easier to see the next step. When I came back down, Evan was scribbling a schedule on the whiteboard. Manny was on speaker with a contractor he trusted. Inspector Lin had left a note that said, "Email me photos as you go." And Zoe, God bless Zoe, was labeling a shoebox deposit audit, return and interest. We dropped the last envelope inside like a pebble, small but real. Around midnight, the building exhaled. People went upstairs carrying tote bags of relief. I sat on the milk crate, hands open on my knees, and let the quiet finally touch my skin. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from an unknown number with Dalton's lawyer's signature line at the bottom. "Cease public statements. We will seek damages." I smiled without teeth and typed back what my mother would have said if she'd been here to see me. "Tell your client to bring receipts." Zoe leaned her head on my shoulder. "You okay?" "I think so," I said. "I think I finally am." Because revenge, when you strip off the movie soundtrack, wasn't a speech or a gloat or a gavel bringing a man to his knees. It was a ledger balanced, a deposit returned, a stairwell lit, a community meeting where no one had to whisper. It was turning a laugh into a line item and then into a lesson. And if you're here for the glow, I'll give you one small thing. When the news clip aired, they used the shot where Dalton said the quiet part out loud. The thumbnail froze on his face mid-word, mouth open, hand half raised, caught between his version of the story and ours. The caption read, "Tenants say enough." I didn't screenshot it. I didn't have to. The building felt different in my bones. That was my proof. Mini bridge to resolution. 2 days later, just before the hearing, Anita called with a sentence that would change everything about what came next. "We've approved you for an emergency rehab line at community rate interest. Fix your roof, Ms. Ellis. Then let's talk long-term." The roof stopped leaking the same week I stopped apologizing for wanting more. It was a small sound at first, rain pattering and then nothing. No drip in the stairwell, no bucket chorus, just quiet where chaos used to live. Crew in neon vests packed up their ladders, and Manny signed the last line on the work order with a steady hand that didn't shake anymore. He looked taller. Maybe we all did. If you've never fixed a building from the inside out, you should know it doesn't feel like victory. Feels like laundry finally done, like breath finally exhaled. We were not a headline anymore, we were a calendar. Every week, Zoe added check marks to the whiteboard. Detectors replaced, 43, stair lights wired 16, basement membrane installed, 1 miraculous sheet, escrow letters sent, every single door. Tenants stopped introducing themselves with problems and started bringing muffins to meetings. We made a ritual of tearing down the old mandatory inspection notices and replacing them with repair schedules and phone numbers that worked. I mailed the first batch of deposit interest checks on a Tuesday afternoon with the bank's community rate rehab line sitting like ballast in our account. Anita from the bank came by in a gray blazer and flats, shook Manny's hand and toured the basement without wrinkling her nose. "You're ahead of pace," she said, faintly surprised. "Let's talk long-term financing next quarter." "Long-term," I repeated, tasting how those words belonged in my mouth now. Court gave us more than a restraining order. The first hearing, the judge listened to Ruben speak in that calm, careful way and to Dalton's lawyer stumble around email printouts that sounded like bad stage directions. We left with an order locking down records and a schedule for discovery that looked like a roadmap to consequences. The city filed its own administrative action over deposits and inspections. It didn't fix the past. It did put a price on it. Dalton himself became a whisper, there, then gone. A month after the hearing, the reporter texted me a link. Local property manager under review for vendor self-dealing. It wasn't my face on the thumbnail this time. It was a blurry shot of him leaving an office with a hand over his mouth like he was holding in a thought that had already betrayed him. I didn't click the comments. I didn't need to. My building's stairs were bright. That was my comment. Evan started coming by on Thursdays with a pizza and the baby in a carrier. He didn't bring advice anymore. He brought a rag and wiped down the lobby mailbox ledges because you always miss the corners, Maya. He said it with a grin that didn't try to fix me. Once, while he was strapping the baby into the stroller, he said, "You know, I always thought stability meant staying put." He nodded up at the new roofline like a man finding a different definition. Maybe it means staying accountable. Maybe, I said and meant yes. We made a room out of the old storage closet, swept it, painted it, strung a strand of warm bulbs across the ceiling. I dragged in a donated spinet and paid a tuner in cash because my mother deserved pure notes even in a repurposed room. On Friday nights, Mrs. Alvarez practiced standards, and a college kid with a sleeve of tattoos played Debussy like water on tell. We called it the quiet room until someone hexed a Sharpie over the door and wrote Teresa's room, and then it was that forever. I thought a lot about my mother those nights, the way she'd correct a student's wrists with 2 fingers and say, "Relax your shoulders, music isn't a fight." I had turned a lot of life into a fight out of necessity. Now I was learning to turn life back into a room people could breathe in. It wasn't perfect. No story that heals is. We lost a tenant who moved to be closer to work, and the hall felt wrong for a week. A pipe burst behind 3A and Manny swore in Spanish so artfully we applauded. I miscalculated a timeline and had to stand up in the lobby and say, "I was wrong, here's the fix." People didn't bite me. They nodded. Transparency costs pride but buys patience. I paid in pride gladly. On a slow Sunday, I walked the length of Maple Drive and looked at the building the way architects look at their work. Lines, angles, how the light in late afternoon turns brick into something soft. I filed my re-enrollment papers for 2 night classes, building systems and code. The admin lady at the college said, "Welcome back," like she was handing me a key I'd set down and finally remembered to pick up. The first night, I took notes in a crisp new notebook and didn't apologize for the life that made my education a little late. Learning tasted like the first sweet sip of cold water after a long errand in July. "Are you happy?" Zoe asked me one night when we were painting trim and the whole lobby smelled like lemons instead of lemons trying to hide mildew. "I think I'm proud," I said. "And not scared." Those are cousins, she said. She dipped her brush and drew one last clean line. Case moved like cases do, slow then fast then slow. Reuben taught me how to read docket updates like weather. There were days I wanted a crescendo, a single slam of a gavel where a judge called Dalton a fraud and confetti fell from the ceiling. That's not how it works. It works like bank letters, settlement conferences where lawyers say without admitting liability, and a sequence of checks that make unpleasant decimals appear in the escrow account labeled restitution. It works like a notice that says license under review and a line near the bottom, tenant reimbursements to be supervised by a third-party administrator. It works like finding out he sold his car to pay attorney's fees and feeling, not triumphant exactly. Just done. About 6 months in, I saw him again. On courthouse steps, of course, because some patterns like their theater. He was thinner. The suit didn't swagger. He clocked me, then looked away like the sun had moved and he wasn't ready. For a second I felt the old urge to explain myself, to narrate what had happened in a way that made him understand he'd misread me from the start. I didn't. The highest form of revenge isn't an explanation. It's a life you don't need to defend. Do you ever wonder, I asked Reuben later, if he'll learn anything? Reuben considered the question like a good teacher. I wonder, he said, if you will keep learning even if he doesn't. I did. We all did. Mrs. Alvarez learned that her word carries. People listen when she talks now. College kids learn to read their leases and to bake a lemon loaf that could make a building forget a hard day. Manny learned that his expertise didn't disappear because a man told him to sign a blank form. Evan learned that older brothers can be later students. Zoe learned that the boss energy she used to spend fixing her own life fits beautifully on a clipboard with everyone's names on it. I learned that I had not been apologizing for needing help. I had been apologizing for making waves. The waves were the point. They carried us all to a shore we didn't know we could reach. Not long after the roof, we held a community night in the lobby. Folding chairs, mismatched mugs, the piano tuned to something like Hope. I wore my blue blouse because it had become a kind of armor I didn't need but liked anyway. Evan set up a projector and with Zoe's insistence we made a simple slideshow before flickering lights, buckets on steps, after glow, palms empty. People laughed. A few cried. At the end I stood on the milk crate one last time, the same one I used when I shook in front of a reporter, and I said, "Thank you for not leaving when it was easier to." The building hummed back. Later, when the chairs were stacked and the hallway smelled like dish soap and frosting, I sat at Teresa's piano and played the simplest song I know, Heart and Soul. Kid from 2D banged along in the bass and somehow it still sounded like a promise. Reuben popped his head into the room. "Your deposition is set for next month," he said apologetically. "It's okay," I said, fingers still finding the notes. "I can do both." "Do both?" "Be a woman who fixes stair lights and answers discovery requests," I said. "We're ambidextrous now." He laughed. "I'll bring donuts." We hung a small plaque by the mailboxes, not a brag, just a map. Where your rent goes, a pie chart we printed every month with real numbers. People stood in front of it with their coffee and traced the slices with their fingers like they were reading their names in a program. Transparency turned strangers into neighbors. Neighbors turned a building into a home. I kept one thing from the old days, the crumpled pay or quit notice that had once made my hand shake. I taped it inside a cabinet with blue painter's tape, next to the trustee's deed and a photo of my mother smiling over a student's shoulder. It wasn't a shrine. It was a ledger of the story. The thing that tried to make me small, the paper that made me brave, the woman who taught me to keep time. If you're still with me, if you've made it to this part because something in your life echoes the sound of keys skittering across a lobby, here's the part where I talk to you and not just about me. I don't know your landlord. I don't know your brother's opinions, your bank balance, the way your building breathes at night. I don't know if your version of Dalton wears a tie or a smile painted like help. I do know this. If the hallway is dark and someone keeps telling you it's a formality, find the switch. If the door looks like it's not meant for you, read the notice anyway. If the laugh lands like a bruise, turn it into a receipt. And if you can't do it alone because none of us did, build your whiteboard, find your Zoe, ask your Manny, call your Ruben, invite your Evan when he's ready. Make the room even if the first chair is a milk crate and the first song is clumsy. I'm not telling you to buy a building. I'm telling you to buy your story back. If this helped, if you saw yourself somewhere in these steps and sockets, tell me below. Share the part where you didn't flinch. Or say the part where you did and then stood up anyway. And if you want more stories like this, messy, real, with receipts and lights that actually work, stick around. I'll keep the porch on. I'll save you a seat by the piano. 'Cause walls tell the truth. And now, finally, so do I.